Looks like I can record. I would like for all the participants to be able to just kind of walk away with some ideas of how they can build scientific thinking skills and activities into mentoring sessions between their mentors and mentees. I'd love it all if participants could be able to use scientific resources, because there's a lot of them out there that we're going to sort of introduce you to better enhance your program outcomes. So we want to sort of be able to, this is definitely not going to cover everything that you need to know about STEM in an hour-long webinar, but this should introduce you to a number of good resources, steps, activities, ideas, skill sets that will help you move along on bringing the world of STEM into your programming. So our agenda for today is basically we're going to just explore a little bit about why this matters, why it would be a good idea to bring STEM into your mentoring program. We're going to sort of talk about how even if you are not at all an academically focused mentoring program, how you can still bring science, technology, engineering, and math into sort of everyday match activities. We'll spend some time exploring what I call some high-impact STEM activities that you can do in a range of settings. We'll definitely take time to then explore a range of good STEM resources that are online, in physical places, that provide sort of reading or literacy materials that provide professional development, that just a whole host of good resources and ideas. From there, we're lastly going to sort of talk about some action steps that you all could take and have you brainstorm some action steps. So anything you are doing around STEM currently would be great to share, but as you see some of this the content of this webinar, definitely feel free to think, oh, this is something we could do with our match, this is something we could do at our organization, this is a match activity we could do, we could take a field trip here. So think through what would be a relevant fit for your programming. Lastly, we're going to have a review of the training and evaluation, so there will be an evaluation form that you can access after the webinar that will also be emailed to all of you. Please be so kind, just take a couple minutes to complete that. Lastly, I'm going to mention that you will be getting we are recording this webinar, so you will get a link to that recording. You will get all these slides will be emailed to you. We've also are just finishing up a resource guide that sort of elaborates on all the concepts introduced in this webinar. So you will be getting that at the end of the webinar as well. So thank you all. So let's first off talk a little bit about why this matters. So from a sort of national perspective, growth in STEM jobs over the past 3 years was 3 times faster than other job areas. So just, but at the same time, of 3.8 million ninth graders, only 233,000 end up choosing STEM degrees in college, science, technology, engineering, or math. So this is one kind of thing where basically it paints a picture of our society in which there's a high need for STEM jobs as they are growing quite rapidly, yet at the same time the U.S. currently is not doing as well as many other countries across the world in providing quality STEM education. So many of the STEM jobs that are needed here in the country can go unfilled, and for a lot of our population that doesn't have STEM skills, it can be sometimes harder to find these jobs as there aren't as many manufacturing jobs in place in rail. And STEM has some roles, just our ability to implement technology has displaced the need for some other types of jobs that did exist. So that's sort of the one big thing from a national perspective. Also, it's a case that being scientifically literate to act effectively as a citizen in our 21st century is really important. A lot of the problems our world faces, whether it's resource scarcity, climate change, dealing with a growing population, requires citizens that can be scientifically literate to point where they can, to sort of help solve a lot of the problems or at least sort of help support policy that does that in a case. So we need more people who can sort of, apply skepticism, analyze data and use and look at sort of the evidence to make good decisions for our future. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but especially in many of the areas where we serve young people, if they are in underserved communities or under-resourced schools, STEM can be especially hard hit. So, you have some schools in more affluent communities where every young person gets an iPad, for example, and there's, computers in every classroom. And then if the school has chronic budget issues, if there's not as much resources to go around, you might not get regular access to a computer. And if the families at home don't have regular, access to a desktop, they don't have access to high-speed internet, you're going to have a wide disparity in access to STEM. So this is, talking about sort of why this matters and why we're getting a sense too that the work you do in youth development and mentoring can really sort of bring a little bit of that STEM to make sure that experience is there for all of our young people to build skills that they need to be successful. And understanding STEM is one really good path to sort of be successful, have more opportunity to be successful in our 21st century. So another reason this really matters, we've kind of got on this at the last point, but this really matters in a sense of equity. It is not an equitable setup on who gets access to STEM experiences and STEM education for a number of reasons. So just a couple examples I'll give you. Women comprise 48% of the workforce, but just 24% of jobs in the STEM field are ultimately held by women. So you can see the disparity there, where it tends to be a lot more males in the STEM field. 75% of all college students are women and students of color, yet they represent only 45% of the degrees in STEM. Women comprise more than, and so in education we can see that disparity, but even in the educational sense, here's an example. Women comprise more than 20% of engineering school graduates, yet there's only 11% of practicing engineers are women. So there's even a drop-off education. And just 17% of degreed and employed black professionals hold a STEM degree. So this could be a whole topic on its own, but this isn't just, it's not just people are choosing not to get into STEM. It's not just if you're a woman or a person of color you don't want to. It's just there's messaging, there's access, there is all sorts of sort of institutional factors that make it so that there are barriers for women and people of color to see STEM. When you think of often the classic amount of scientists that are presented, they tend to be white and male. When you think about sort of the messages folks can get, it really can sort of push people in another direction. So one example is Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's one of our preeminent astrophysicists. He's head of the Hayden Planetarium, and he really talked about. He's an African American, male, and he talks about how throughout his time growing up, he was really pushed by a lot of school staff to get more into athletics. He went to New York public schools, and really it was in spite of a lot of messaging he got, in spite of the New York public school systems, that he became a successful STEM professional. He hosts the series Cosmos, which is a very popular series on Fox now. But he talked about he really had to overcome a lot of sort of messaging hurdles, a lot of sort of different pushes from people pushing him in a different direction to actually make it into the STEM field. And when he got there, he didn't see a lot of people that looked like him in the field. So he talks very, very well about this issue. But it is one, and ultimately it's a economic issue when the majority of our workforce is sort of pushed away from STEM. But it's absolutely an issue about equity, where these folks who are pushed away are losing this opportunity to engage with something that's could be engaging, that's important, that can be economically beneficial. So that's why this matters from an equity standpoint. And a lot of the program you can do can sort of help be a buffer to that and help make sure it is accessible for all young people. So the last point is STEM is something that can certainly be seen as very scary. Sometimes you will, for math especially, you're a math person or you're not a math person. And if you're not a math person, whoa, you should stay away from math. That's kind of a message that a lot of folks can get. But like anything, with practice and effective effort, with guidance, STEM can be learned, it can be mastered. It's not an all or nothing. There's always opportunities to grow and engage with it. There's many different ways to approach it with a young person. At its heart, it's about our ability to reason and observe phenomena. It's in this world. I think one of the most important things for folks to be able to understand is the scientific method, which is our best tool for learning new things about our planet, which there's a lot of ways to bring that into a lot of everyday activities. And lastly, there's a vast array of resources out there for support and exploration with STEM. So there's a lot, you're going to see a lot here. There's professional development guides, there's tons of activities online, there's activities, ideas for doing things elsewhere, there's curriculum that's just available. So it's something that there's a lot of supports for. It can be learned like anything else. And it's a very important thing just try to engage with it, even if it's not something that's always been your cup of tea, for example. So we're going to sort of spend some time now thinking about how we can bring science, technology, engineering, and math into everyday activities. And sort of at the heart of this are a number of core methodologies and core processes that are very important to the science, technology, engineering, and math fields. That I think these you'll see examples of how these are brought into activities later. We're going to spend some time first going into some science and engineering activities, into science and engineering, and then the latter part we'll have some a good exploration of technology and math at the end, so just know that as well. But these are some core skills that are just terrific to work into programming or activities. So they're the design process, the observation skills and reasoning, ability to be skeptical, number sense, inquiry, the use of the scientific methods. So I'll just touch upon all these, but there's obviously a lot more to learn, and all the links here will direct you to more information about these. But the design process this is a model of it, but it's really how, when there's a problem that gets identified, how folks in teams go about brainstorming, researching, and designing some type of product or action that solves that problem. So it's very much used in engineering or design, but all the products that we sort of use in our day-to-day lives have gone through this design process where a certain product was tested out, that if there was feedback and explorations of how that test went, then they go back and redesign that product. So whenever you're making something, this is a really good process to use, and often the key parts are getting young people to sort of brainstorm and design something first before they just test it out, and then make sure that they sort of keep track of how that test goes and redesign it. So very much used in engineering and design. Observation skills and reasoning, so getting young people to practice maybe their careful observation using a magnifying lens, keeping data of observations, and keeping note of things in a journal, or just writing it down, or keeping a log of it on an iPhone, and then using sort of reasoning, helping them develop their reasoning ability to sort of put those data points together. It's very big. Skepticism in science is huge, so whenever a theory or hypothesis comes out, you want to be skeptical and try to poke holes in it, not just to be difficult, but really the idea is anything that we want to put out as knowledge, we want to make sure it's as valid as possible, and to do that you sort of test it out and try to poke holes, and if it holds up after you do that, after a sort of air of skepticism, then we know it's a really valid idea or point. So skepticism is a great skill. It's a great skill, I think, for peer learning as well, when you think about sometimes issues of gossip or that can come into the day-to-day life, but a great skill in itself to infuse. Always asking young people, how do you know that that's the case? What about this? That's a good thing. So in math, number sense is huge. It's the ability to get a sense of how large or small numbers are, having a scale of the different units of hundreds, thousands, millions, and knowing how they relate to one another. So in day-to-day interactions, seeing those numbers, relating real numbers to real products, and having young people think about it. But this is a skill that makes math a lot more challenging if you don't kind of have that sense of it. So great opportunity to practice. Inquiry is a process, I think it's infused in a lot of learning, but especially science. It's this idea that you really want to let learners figure things out for themselves. You don't want to just give anyone the answer. It's a process for folks to learn and come to conclusion is so important. And at the same time, if you just give an answer, it's not going to be as meaningful as folks really figure it out for yourselves. And then lastly, the scientific method, which involves asking questions, asking testable questions, conducting background research, generating a testable hypothesis, designing an experiment, recording and analyzing data, and from that data drawing conclusions at the heart of how we learn new things about our world. So all of these, this is a very broad overview of these very important skills, but you'll see these infused in some of the activities that we will talk about later. And now we're going to really go on to further how we bring some of, especially the science, into everyday practices. So even if you are a community-based program without much of an academic focus, you can absolutely bring these skills, these STEM skills, into a lot of everyday activities. And we're going to go over 4 examples: sledding, basketball, cooking, and exercise, of a way you can make them a little bit more STEMmy and both help young people learn some of the scientific method, and as well as learn a little bit of the science content. So So sledding, for example, I did this with my little brother. Actually, we were sledding. We had two sleds, and I think I posed this question. I can't remember if he did or not, but he wanted to know which of these sleds goes the fastest. And I sort of worked with him, thinking, how can we sort of figure this out? And he came up with some ideas, and together we brainstormed. We came up with a hypothesis. He thought his sled went faster, and we sort of worked together to create an experiment where we released the sled from the exact same point on the hill without any further weight, and we did that a number of times to kind of get more trial data, and we kept track of which sleds were faster or which sleds won the race kind of down the hill. But the idea is I sort of helped him see that in order to do this, you had to release from the same points. You wanted to isolate the variable of sled design, so you wanted everything else to be the same. And from that, we could kind of generate a conclusion that one sled, his sled might have been faster based on some of the data that we've collected. So with that, I got him to think a little bit about the scientific method. He also looked a little bit about, he got to explore some concepts of velocity, of acceleration, of friction maybe, of sort of some ideas around there, just superficially, but easy activity to do. With basketball, asking young people, which is the best part of the basket to hit? Why? How do you know? You can create a question. You can make a guess. You can, test out with an experiment. And obviously they might say it's the part with the tape right behind it, but how do you really know that? And you can sort of do a trial run where you take shots in a way where you're keeping everything the same except how the part of the basket that the ball is hitting. So, and you can see which places go in or go out the most. You can have them think about why that's the case, and think about some of the sort of physics involved. But another great way to bring a little bit of the scientific method into some programming. Cooking, I always think that a great cooking class is often better than many of the science classes that happen, as there's so much science processes and science concepts involved in cooking. There's chemistry and biology, a little bit of thermodynamics and physics, and then at the same time it's all about experimentation and designing and following a procedure. So, but a simple thing you can, get young people to practice, practicing to following a recipe is great, but you can have young people experiment, so we have 2 recipes for cookies. We have this one recipe for cookies. We want to make the tastiest cookie possible. Let's change one thing during this, and we'll do an experiment. So we'll change the amount of salt. We'll see which one kind of tastes a little bit better, which one tastes a little bit worse, do everything the same. We can talk about the effect of salt on this cookie recipe. This is a great thing to do. Exercise, all sorts of things, it's a great thing to do in general, but you can have young people measure their heart rate when they exercise and sort of try to look at how exercise affects our heart rate, which gives you a very good, solid, dependent variable. If you get a timer, you can sort of see which types of exercise, affects our heart rate the most, causes us to breathe more and more efficient, more at a higher rate than other points. So, do jumping jacks do that? Does running in place do that? So, all sorts of room to bring in experimentation with exercise. Lots of other activities that do this. I think I have some other resources that bring STEM into everyday activities. So, these are just some good examples here. So just some sort of lasting thoughts on ways to bring, these STEM skills into the everyday. Definitely infuse skills, find that, be open and have that lens of how can you bring some STEM into sort of some of the everyday activities that we are doing with, that our matches are doing. Using great questions, what would happen if, why do you think this happens the way it does? What did you observe occur is huge. Using those questions, curiosity, is really important. Work with mentees to really carefully and observe and carry out everyday experiments, modeling that process, showing them that process, asking questions that help them think through that process is good, modeling your own curiosity and encourage that in the young mentees. So you, as a mentor, it's always good to just be curious. That will, and be interested in the world. It makes it a lot more interesting, but it's that important, please, for asking that initial question, which is sort of at the heart of, again, doing this STEM work. Model your reasoning and thinking aloud. So this is a good just educator strategy in general, but making sure that you are, when I did that sledding example, I was talking with my mentee who's was 11 at the time, and I was just thinking with him, I'm wondering that if we release the sled from different places, it might be that one part of the hill was a little bumpier. That might affect the sled speed when really we want to know just which sled is faster. So I'm thinking that like I basically talked out my logic for setting up that experiment so that he could sort of get that information, get some of those ideas, and have an opportunity to internalize it for himself. So, so it's a lot of making your thinking that you've accrued as an adult more transparent to a young person in the world of STEM is a great thing. Great. Great. And let me just see if there are questions at this point. So, oh, did anyone else just lose sound now? Can everyone hear okay? Okay, so I just saw one person writing, okay, I see one person saying yes, so I will check that we are good with the sound. It looks like we're good with the sound here, and just, yeah, always little things with it, so, but thank you all. So now we're going to go and look into some high-impact STEM activities. Again, if you have questions about that last section, feel free to type them in, and we'll try to get to them as we go, and definitely at the end, certainly. So, but some high-impact STEM activities, a fruit dissection activity called Float Your Boat, and a Super Bridge activity. And we'll sort of go into these three activities that both allow young people to, allow learners to practice STEM methodology, so some of those design processes or the scientific method, but also allow a young person to explore some really good STEM concepts as well. So the fruit dissection is, rather than dissecting, an animal, this is always, or something that was living, a fruit dissection can be a really great way to sort of have fun, practice the skill of dissection, practice some of the skills of observation, and do some really good, dissection, some good science skills with something that you can ultimately eat at the end, which is also a lot of fun. So, so what this ultimately does is you have a range of different fruits and vegetables, from tomatoes, apples, bananas, lettuce, kiwis, or you can get exotic fruits like durian, or maybe something that is also local. It's a great, and then you can sort of have young people sort of draw what one of these pieces of fruit or vegetables look like on the inside that they're going to dissect. You can predict what they'll see on the inside. You can explain what they think of the purpose of some of the fruits are and the vegetables. Like, well, why are these here? What's the purpose of the celery for? The overall plant. Why is fruit tasty? What does it do? What's its function? Why is it the way it is? You can make a careful and talk about that initially with a young person. You can then make a careful incision through the fruit, and always with dissection you want to make as little cuts as general. You want to do as least, so that way you can really get to observe something as accurately as possible. You can have the young person observe what's inside. They can try to find the seeds and count them, and sort of think about, well, what does this do? And have them sort of guess, will this have a seed? Will that have a seed? What do you think will be inside? Why is a seed there? You can eat some of the fruit and the vegetables at the end and plant some of the seeds. And what this ultimately does is it leads to a dissection. You can go in a number of directions with this, which we'll explore. So you can learn with the young person. You can help them, identify and differentiate some of the structures in plants. So looking at things like the broccoli, which is the flower, to the fruit, which is that reproductive organ, which is or the vessel for reproduction in the plant, or the celery, which is the body and the stalk. And why is that green versus why is the apple red? Does that make a difference? You can have them just practicing their observation and inference skills in itself, seeing what's in and outside the fruit or vegetable and making inference from that. You can have a discussion about what's the difference between a fruit and a vegetable, what's the difference between these different parts here. You can sort of, a good thing to do maybe would be to show them pictures, either on a computer or smartphone of what these plants look like either when they're growing in a farm or in the wild, to sort of help extend their thinking and observation and seeing where they are and what their function might be. And definitely you can enjoy eating the fruits and vegetables, often more so afterward. This is often a great way to get kids excited about vegetables, actually, because it's sort of, there's a good build-up. And especially if you get fruits and vegetables from different cultures, you can, broaden their horizons in eating. So this is good for elementary age young folks. It can be good for middle school. You can definitely ramp up the complexity and talk about different types of fruits and look more into what are some more specifics of the structure. Lots of great things to do. So another wonderful activity is, and again, you can do these in a site-based program, but you could also just do these, a mentor and a mentee could do these on their own in different ways too. So all sorts of settings this can be good for. So a float your boat activity. This is I always have a lot of fun doing this one. It's you get a tub or a sink, or a sink that's filled with water. You want to get some tin foil, and you want to have like 50 plus pennies or so, maybe a little bit more depending on the young people you have. Definitely get some paper towels, and basically you want to ask a young person, what do you think the best design for a boat is? What do you that will hold the most weight? And you can have them make a hypothesis and draw a design. You can show them the parts that you have. You're going to get this one square piece of tin foil. Make all the tin foil parts the same, and then they have to come up with a design of a boat, and they can experiment with one design, and they can put it in the water and see, that this tin foil floats. And then what they're doing from there is, if you have the pennies or if you have nuts and bolts, whatever uniform small unit of a weighted object is, you're going to count off how many pieces your boat can hold. So you're going to put in 1 penny at a time, and you count 1 penny, 2 penny, and see that see how many pennies your boat can ultimately hold for 10 seconds before it sinks. If it sinks, you have the emperor's, what can we do to redesign this boat? What can we do to make this hold more weight? It's sort of you're basically getting the young person to go through that design process, to create a prototype, to brainstorm a design, to answer a problem, to create and learn a little bit about buoyancy, learn a little bit about the properties of water in the process. So it's a really cool thing. And just why it's a beneficial STEM activity is it's fun. It gets young people to practice the design process. It examines physical properties of water. You can explore concepts of volume, mass, and density, and getting help a young person get to the point where they learn a little bit more about what density is. You have some objects that are really large and have a lot of volume. You have some objects that have a lot of mass, but its density is volume divided by mass. And basically, you can ultimately sort of help them get to this place where something will be buoyant if it is less dense than the liquid it is floating on. So this is a good explanation here on this link. And a good extension of this is just if you have this tub of water, and this is especially good for younger people, get a number of different objects like sticks, like paper, like rocks or coins, things that are small, things but light, things that are big, things that are dense but less dense, and just have a young person, find materials to test, make predictions as to whether they will float, sink, or hover, test out each object, keep that little record if you can. It's just a simple chart, and make notes of the results, and then brainstorm from there. So we saw the stick floated, the stick floated, but the penny sunk. Why do you think that was? What makes it so that floated versus not? It's a really good way to it's very inquiry-based to do this, and especially if you let the young people design and find other objects to test. Great things, allows for prediction, reflection, and again, this experience. So again, all these activities can be done on a range of settings. You can kind of get a sense of how you can infuse, how you can carry out these activities just from this. There's all sorts of directions here, but these are some good ones. So. And I'll mention the float your boat you can do for middle school aged young people, definitely. For it's also, I've done it for elementary age young people. And if you really wanted to, you can make it more complex and sort of be more rigorous about the design process and ramp it up for high school aged students. Either way, it's fun. So Super Bridge. So this is one that it's sort of similar to, rather than designing a boat, you're designing a bridge, and you're using these sort of materials, a can and dry spaghetti strips. So you want to have these, and you're also getting a flat piece of cardboard. And what you want to do is you can do this one-on-one, or you can organize students into small teams and make it a contest. But you want to provide these bridge building handouts, which are at the link here, and you design and build a tower structure using this uncooked spaghetti. And your goal is to sort of see, how much you want to sort of create a bridge using this just flat pieces of cardboard that go from one tower to the next, and you want to see how much weight those bridges can hold. So again, having something like pennies or having something, sort of like little nuts or balls, something of a uniform weight. And you want to see how many pieces of weight it can hold. And it's really good because it gets into more advanced, physics topics. Also allows for, there's calculations that can be done. So if you can weigh the object that you are putting on the bridge, you can sort of can calculate the amount of mass that each bridge can support with some type of a scale, but you can explore concepts of tension, torsion, compression, triangulation, Newton's third law, force and load, and there's an explanation of all of these here, as those are definitely bigger concepts. But Again, and it's a great opportunity to practice with the design process, so you can see how much weight the bridge held and then redesign it to try to make it improved. One good tip when you're doing the redesign process, and it's sort of that one thing at a time principle, where you want to make one change at a time to something to really see if that one change really made a design better or not as effective. So kind of that controlled experiment idea. That's really good. So there's lots of a world of great STEM activities here. We looked at 3 in depth. I'm going to mention a few others here, but just know there's literally like thousands that you can use that you want to choose based on the interests of your young people, of your community, of things that they sort of experience in their day-to-day lives. You can take a lot of activities and make them more complex or less complex for different age ranges, but this might take you back to middle school a little bit with some of these. But there's some here like the egg drop, which is a great activity where you try to again drop an egg from a high from a on a high 2-story building or from a certain height, and try to make sure that it can survive the drop. And it's a great way to explore the design process and understanding different forces and different motions, understanding how the effect of gravity. Great thing to do. Paper airplane contest. Simply it's a lot of fun. Have young people design paper airplanes, see how far they go or how fast, how long they stay in the air, or how anything along those lines, and have them redesign those paper airplanes. Very easy to, all you need is the paper ultimately, but there's a link here with some further sort of instructions if you want to spruce it up in any way and look at some of the concepts. The capillary actions of water in plants. This is that classic celery stalk in dyed water that sees how plants sort of circulate water all throughout their body, and sort of really helps young people get a sense that, oh, these plants are actually kind of doing things. They're moving around. They're sort of reacting to stimuli in the environment. Man, I think they actually might be living things. So, but you can definitely do experiments where you see how heat might affect this process, or how temperature, or how the amount of celery stalks, or different types of water like salt water, and then create some cool, interesting different experiments to look at this overall process of transpiration in the plants. So very good thing to do. Lima bean dissection, sort of like a fruit dissection, but looking at sort of the actual seed within the fruit more in depth. So you can, you get a couple lima beans, you dissect one that's dry, you dissect another that's been soaked in water, you note the differences, you get to explore the plant physiology a little bit, the cotyledon, the seed coat, and the embryo. There's a lot of information about all of these things, but it's a great way to also really kind of carry out a dissection, a bit of the scientific method. What's the effect of water on a seed, for example? Modeling erosion is just, if you want to, take a bunch of rocks, put them in like a closed coffee can and shake them, and just, there's ways you can sort of test that out further, shake it for longer, but it's basically modeling how different forces actually break down the rocks and the mountains and sort of the geology in our world. So it's a great concept for young people to understand that these things get broken down, that rocks break down into smaller rocks and ultimately into sand and silt, and you can see that by doing this process. It's a good way to model it, and through questioning they can really get to that place. There's a range of great sensory activities at this link here that allow young people to explore their senses, practice observation and inference. The Stroop effect is a fun one. It looks at a little bit of psychology. You have a list of colors written in different colors, and the young person or the learner has to really just try to list they have to say the color of the word, not what the color spells, and you can sort of test this out in different ways, test it out on different age ranges, but usually what happens is people end up having a harder time to saying what the color spells versus noting the actual color. So there's a link that will make this much more concrete here. Candle in a jar, great activity. Use some lab safety, but you cover a candle with some food-colored water in a jar and look at how heat, the effects of trapping gases in a container affects the flame and affects heat. Ice cream making will make you very popular here. You can look at, get cream, get a couple bags, one that will have salt on it, and you can look at the how salt affects ice cubes and affects the temperature of an object. So, but will also ultimately make ice creams. It's very popular. There's a really good explanation of doing this activity, and I believe a video here at Steve Spangler Science. So. All these great activities, definitely chime in with your questions, as I'm kind of covering a lot here, but there's all these will have good resources if one of these seemed relevant to ever do with a young person. And again, there's a lot more where this came from. So we'll just finish up this kind of science and engineering section with just exploring some further steps to take. As mentioned before, the process of figuring something out is really an important thing in itself, rather than just maybe the sort of learning or fact that kind of comes about as that process. So you really, I can say to a young person, the world is round. And they might be able to say that back, but do they really have a conceptual understanding in their head of what that looks like? Can they really visualize the world as a globe? It might not be the case. Or if I just say to them, the process for photosynthesis, glucose, which is C6, H12O8 equals, carbon dioxide plus sunlight plus H2O, they can say that, but do they really get that, most of our plants are made up of carbon dioxide and they're coupled with water and sunlight through this very complex process makes glucose? That might not be, as useful. It might not be something that they actually quite sort of get. So they can say the words, but they might not be able to conceptually do anything with the information, or it might not stick, and it might not really change how they view these processes as they move further, which is sort of the ultimate point. So focusing on the process, going in depth is really important. After you have an activity, a great way to extend is, say, let's maybe read more about this. Let's check out something on Wikipedia or online, or take out a book on this concept. We did this great activity on floating your boat with buoyancy. Why don't we just watch that little video about where Bill Nye is going to explain that? Check it out for a bit so we can sort of really solidify our understanding. That's a great way just to provide a young person with more information versus just telling them the answer to, I'll say. Opportunities for experience, so finding, really extending what they are learning about into new domains. So if you've done this float your boat activity, if you're ever near water again, then you can sort of say, hey, look, remember when we did that float your boat activity, we looked at why things float. I noticed that, sort of some of the bugs on the water, they're able to float, but definitely you can see some of the things. What do you see? What do you think was floating here? Why not? Why is this the case? Always with learning, you want it to, anything a learner learns, you want it to ultimately be able to be transferred to new settings so that they can actually use that information in a relevant fashion. That's very important with STEM. So always kind of think about how they can transfer learning and in different opportunities for experiences. So lastly, journaling or talking about phenomena for reflection. So this is a really good way to solidify new knowledge. You can journal about things, you can write about them, you can draw what you experience after doing an activity. So if you did a fruit dissection, drawing some of those dissections afterwards help really solidifies in the learner's head what the fruit really looks like on the inside and what are the parts of this fruit or vegetable that they've just dissected. Talking about things, what do we see here? What did we do? What did you sort of explore in that last science experiment I knew you did? That's also a good opportunity to help solidify this new learning, which will ultimately help make this learning more important and real for them. So these are some good educational strategies, but good further steps to take when after doing a STEM activity and when doing one. Great. Feel free to, again, type in with any questions, but just to sort of finalize this up at, general science strategies are making sure you ask great questions, so open-ended questions that are, what do you think will happen when? Why is this happening? What does this do? What do you see here? How do you know? These are always good questions to kind of ask, to probe, to sort of solicit more in-depth thinking from a learner. Allowing learners to build a deeper understanding of a concept versus sort of a sort of more surface level understanding is really important. So depth versus breadth, and this is very much shown with different educational resources, and it's usually infused to a lot more curriculums, but it's better to have a deeper understanding of a few concepts than a superficial understanding of 15. It allows a learner to integrate that information more effectively, to connect one idea to another more with more ability. Often it allows for more of a ability to develop a process or a skill set in exploring things. So always, rather than just covering a lot of different things, focus on some really core things and really unpack those concepts and go deeper with them before you just move on to another thing. So find everyday situations to infuse that scientific thinking, and we mentioned that in the last thing, but always great things to do. Keep it fun. Certainly keep it fun, as, again, especially maybe around that middle school age. STEM can be something that, loses a lot of its sort of joy, and there's a lot of joy to be had with it. So just know that it's really important to kind of, keep things positive. Always, I would say, you want to maintain a positive experience versus driving in a certain idea or concept, because even if you do that in the midst of stress, it's not going to be as meaningful necessarily. Don't do anything a young person could do. If they can set up the experiment themselves, let them do it, if maybe with some direction, but help them build that autonomy and initiative in all the things that they're conducting, and help them, if they can come up with an experiment or come up with a question or hypothesis, let them do that. Give them the space to really practice these skills and practice the habits that make an effective STEM professional. Create opportunities to predict, reflect upon, and connect the experiences to students, to connect learning to experiences students already have had. So these are great ways to make sure the content's solidified. And then keep it relevant and be able to explain why this subject matters. So if you're exploring this fruit dissection, be able to really say to a learner, why does this, be able to explain to them why it matters that they know this. That's always a really important thing to do, so it's relevant to them. Maybe because this will help them eat more in a more healthy fashion, or help them, develop a garden, which they have to do one day later, or help them, all sorts of things. You can come up with creative answers, but don't just say because you're going to be tested on this, at a later point. That's not, not exactly what we're going for here. Great. So, what I'm going to say with STEM vocabulary, it's you want to also try to use some good vocabulary when you're doing these concepts. Now, sometimes it can be the case, a bad STEM lesson will often just have people learn the vocabulary without having an actual lab or experience or activity that they do to really experience that phenomena. But at the same time, if you just sort of do the fruit dissection, but there's you're not giving any of the vocabulary that could be attached with it, it doesn't help a learner really use that information in a later time. So that vocabulary really helps the learner sort of access that information at a later point. It helps them do different things. A good, example of this is if I was sometimes try to fix my bike, and I try to describe it to someone else, but I don't really know the different parts in detail of my bicycle, and because of that, I can't really think I don't know which part is what. I don't really even see as much differentiation because I don't know that there's the discrete name of all these parts. So that's just one simple example. The vocabulary words attached help a learner kind of attach a label to a certain part or certain object that they see, and that's a very good thing to do. So with your support, infuse some of the vocabulary into your activities and into your day-to-day experiences, your hypothesis, your cotyledon, kingdom, phylum, class, order, whatever is relevant there. Use that vocabulary, but also maybe take the time to say, a hypothesis or educated guess. So give the definition too, so that young people can build those vocabulary skills themselves. This is a little bit more information down here about this, so there's lots of good opportunities for this. So lastly, just in terms of some science resources that you can get a lot more on, so there's 3 here that provide a great set of science activities. So Steve Spangler Science has hundreds of short videos and science experiments that you can kind of carry out. They're these great 2 or 3 minute long or 1 minute long videos. Curiosity Machine, you can observe videos of engineers and scientists and find resources to build activities off of their actual work. So it's a really cool way to connect what their activities to real world work of science. Science Buddies is this huge library of 1,000+ project ideas. It has a topic selection wizard that helps a young person or helps a parent or a mentor find activities that might be really relevant for a learner to do, that match interests, or have project guides. You can connect with professionals. There's a whole slew of great things on STEM Buddies. These are all free to use, I believe. To access some of their resources, you might need to create an account, but that's free. You just get their ongoing emails, which one can deal with. In terms of literacy, I'm going to mention some of these. One I really love in general is Newsella here. So you can find some really great articles on a range of topics, but definitely you can find one that are relate to STEM in a number of fashions. But what you can do with Newsella is that you can very efficiently adjust the complexity of the article, so you can make it a little bit easier to read, have simpler vocabulary, or you can make it longer with more more complex vocabulary and more complex sentence structures. So you can really pare down articles to make them more complex or less complex to match the needs of your learners. And literacy is just a great thing, again, to, if you have a literacy-based program you can use. It's always good to read with a young person. These are some great places to find science-related or STEM-related reading material. Great. So the ultimate STEM resources, this is where I'm going to bring this one over and see if this, hopefully you all can see this. So, oh good, you can all see it. So this is something that, there's, again, a lot of good resources available on STEM. This is, maybe the ultimate from, it's a blog posting, but basically this is a website where you can find, it's broken down by grade level, so elementary, middle, and high school, or other activities. You can find games and apps, websites, contest camps, career resources. So we can go down here and just see, look for, if you want to look at STEM, STEM career resources for an elementary age young person, you can find some really good resources here, videos and jobs about science. There's just lots of good things, but what I'll mention too about this is geared to really be for the young person themselves, for the learner, for the mentee. So they can go on here and they can really sort of play around with this website and just find things that would be relevant for them, whether it's a contest, whether it's an app, whether it's a website, whether it's a career connection. So this is one really good resource. You can go on, a mentor and a mentee can go on together and just find a lot of really good things that really do some cool STEM activities and learn more about this world together. Okay. So the last thing I'll mention, in terms of the science here are these places that are good to go. Now, the key thing I'm going to mention, now this is where it gets a little different because some of you are from Rhode Island and some of you are from Massachusetts. So this will be a little differentiated, but it's also the case our states aren't too far from one another, so there might be some certain relevance regardless. The key message I'm going to give away is that there are obviously STEM places like the Museum of Science or the Museum of Natural History and Planetarium in Providence, or the Roger Williams Park Zoo. Those are kind of obvious good STEM places to go to, and there definitely are great places. But what I'll mention is that any place that maybe has a really good, any place that allows for just a really good experience that involves a natural physical world in itself can be a great STEM resource. So for example, the Slater Mill is just sort of this old mill that really demonstrates hydropower that was used in the olden days. That just shows a range of good physics and forces in motion for young people and really kind of makes some of those concepts come to life. It might be something when they have to learn those concepts in school later on, they can think back to, how they saw this mill work, and that's kind of it's very useful in itself. The Coggeshall Farm, this is a picture of it. It's sort of one of those old historical reenactment areas. It's really a cool place, but I mean, even in this picture alone, this young person's getting some experience with the old-time foods or metalworking or or sort of farming techniques that really just bring to life a lot of concepts in biology or chemistry or physics, and make it very sort of accessible. So it's definitely something that might be geared more towards a social studies class, but it definitely involves a lot of STEM, and definitely might provide the basis for how a learner thinks about STEM later on. So those are just a couple examples. There's a lot of other really good resources here that folks at the Rhode Island Mentoring Partnership, Sue Thomas, put together. Definitely, from an aviation museum to a bird sanctuary to biomes. There's lots of great places in Rhode Island to think about, and I'll just give you a few other examples here. Similarly, this model, Gilbert Stuart's birthplace, a Looking Glass Theater, Model Railroad Club is one where really, again, it's just a model railroad, but there's all sorts of, principles of engineering and in steam engines and that are in motion in some of these physics and, physical sciences that would be great for a young person to have experience to. Even the Rhode Island Philharmonic, you might be asking, how is that a STEM resource? It gives some of the really, helping a learner see or hear and experience these processes around sound in itself. It's just that real world learning, that experiences that they will draw upon for later learning. So that's one thing that I will kind of include. Just a few in mass. I will sort of highlight here. There's definitely plenty more. And at the bottom of this website here, there's other places where you can find other field trips or other good STEM resources. But definitely, there's great mass Audubon sanctuaries across the state. Museum of Science is a classic one. Two things I will mention about the Museum of Science. There's this one great program there called Design Challenges where young people get to go in groups and they really get to sort of have this really interesting hands-on activity where they're designing a boat, they're designing a satellite sometimes, they're designing a sled that will go down a racetrack, and it's really gets them, it's a great place to practice the design process and use some good skills and get feedback from volunteers. Also at the Museum of Science is the Computer Clubhouse, which is sort of this based off of the makers movement. It's a place where volunteers and staff and young people come together to make really cool things. They have a 3D printer, they have a sort of sound studio, and young people are just sort of guided and supported in, making really great things on their own with support. It's free to go to there, even if it's in the Museum of Science. Matches can go there, but they do mentoring themselves and are a program in our network. So these are just really other great places to go to have some great STEM experiences that Matches can enjoy together. So yeah, so we're going to spend a little time now, and thank you all. If you have any questions about those places, resources, feel free to chime those in. I'm very happy to talk further about any of those. At this point, we'll just spend a little time looking at the technology piece and how that relates to the world of STEM and how you can bring it into your programming. So what I'll mention too is there's two facets of technology. There's the ability for technology to support learning experiences, and there's also the ability for technology to allow for the creation of products that will encapsulate learning. One thing I'll really mention with the use of technology is you don't want to just assume that young people are great at using technology because they're growing up in a world of technology. You want to sort of know that they might not have practice using some of the basics like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office. You want to sort of give, and it's important to sort of learn what they are using with technology, how they're using it, and seeing, helping them use it more effectively so that they can, access some of the great things that are out there in technology and develop their skills around it in a positive fashion. So one of the key areas which I mentioned is that technology can provide a scaffold or supports. It can be a tool to expedite tasks and allow you to accomplish things more efficiently. A simple example of that is like a calculator or spell check. It automatically does things that sort of saves us time and energy. It's also a great thing to create models that make the abstract world concrete. So an example of this you'll see is sort of you can find these great online cell models that show you all the parts of the cell that allow learners to access what a cell looks like, to interact with a cell that they really couldn't do otherwise. So it's really a good thing to do in that end. So just an example of some of these scaffolds that we do are, the Cells Alive, which I mentioned earlier, is that interactive cell model. Documentaries like Cosmos Life and Planet Earth really bring to life some of the ecological concepts and sort of processes in plants and animals that you can see. I use them a lot. Khan Academy provides these, thousands of great introductions to math and other academic concepts. There's a guy on a chalkboard, Saul Khan, doing these great things, explaining the concepts to folks. Google Earth is a great way. I think it's a free download, but you can, and this is sort of a little desktop. You can see all the parts of the world that Google has put together. There's a sky section. There's other ocean section. It's just a really cool thing to make parts of the globe that wouldn't otherwise be accessible, a little bit accessible for a young person. Shmoop Essay Lab is a support that helps young people organize their essays. 60-second recap provides these 60-second videos on a range of books and literature. CK12, Newsella, we've talked a little bit about CK12 has all of these great sort of different learning problems. edX is just, maybe a cool thing to show that is a place where there's all these free online classes, hundreds of free online college-level classes that would be great to make a young person aware of. That there's all these opportunities to learn all sorts of great things in a very interactive, community-based fashion. It's a great thing to check out. Products. Technology can also provide opportunities to create products that really encapsulate learning, that allow for the creation of something meaningful, that demonstrate knowledge or make something of value. So we'll see some examples of that. this that will elaborate on this. So classics are the Microsoft Office suite. Word allows us to create Word documents. Excel creates data and spreadsheets. PowerPoint, you can make some really good presentations. But these are all tools for the creation of a product that encapsulate, writing, design, or some sort of an analytical or data entry skill. These seem basic, but we use them every day. It's great maybe to have a little bit of time to see where the mentee's at, where a young person's at, and using them and show them. And some of them seem a little dry, but young people actually really love PowerPoint. I found it's pretty popular with them. So it's kind of engaging with all the animations that you can do. GarageBand, this is a picture of GarageBand where it's a free download on the Mac, but it allows for learners to design their own songs, and sort of get the chance to sort of be, sort of like they would at a record studio. Very cool thing to do. With Google Earth, you can create tours. So, with a support or scaffold, you can use that tool to create tours where, young people go from place to place and are allowed to record audio or bring in other images. So, very cool thing to do. I'm going to mention a really important one here. Scratch is a tool that it's both a product and a scaffold or a support. It allows young people to it's sort of an introductory to computer design. It's created by MIT, but you can create games and animations, and you sort of drag and drop different commands to sort of allow learners to sort of program a little sprite in the center of the screen. But it's a really great way to get them introduced to programming and to design something meaningful. So the design of a product can allow for rich learning opportunities. It can make it a lot more engaging to practice different skills because you're creating something that might be relevant or of meaning to a young person. These are and technology allows this in a really great way to do. Okay, great. So math, I'm going to mention allows for the conceptual. There's 2 points I want to sort of go into here with mathematics and just sort of kind of give an overview. There's the conceptual understanding of mathematical concepts, and then there's the fluency. So the conceptual understanding is, does a young person know what they're doing when they're dividing, for example? Do they understand what all these processes, all these numbers, all these things kind of mean? And the fluency is are they able to carry out the operation and with a reasonable amount of, in a reasonable amount of time so that they can kind of do what they need to do, which those are both important for math skills. And these are both opportunities for mentoring programs to practice. So with the conceptual piece, there's lots of great opportunities to recognize mathematics in daily life. So when I play Monopoly with my young person, I'm constantly helping them think through the concepts of probability. There's great ways to go in depth with that. Cash exchanges you can do and help them sort of predict how much you might spend at a different outing. Cooking, again, involves a lot of proportions and ratios. So it's a wonderful opportunity to sort of think through some different math concepts. Resources, these are a number of really good resources that ultimately what most of these are about are sort of providing videos, providing online tools, but providing real-world learning towards math. So Money Math connects math to finances. Mixing in Math will puts the fun and creativity into everyday math activities. TED Ed allows Math in Real Life, and this link will allow users to create customized lessons around YouTube videos. So that's sort of the main idea, but really this can be a good way to make math come to life and allow young people to practice with. So that is sort of the wrap-up there is a little bit, I know it's a little quick in the math section, so my apologies there, but I'll be happy to sort of talk further with anyone afterwards. These are some action steps that we've brainstormed that we think are good things to do, so you can pass on these resources to your mentors and maybe a match support session or an ongoing learning opportunity or a match support phone call. You can utilize Click to Science Professional Development, which will help you really develop further skill sets in a range of concepts. This is an awesome resource for STEM practitioners, especially if you're doing a site-based program. It's focused for after-school professionals, but it gives them skills in asking scientific questions, partnering with outside science agencies, all sorts of really good things. It has videos and resources around each of these sort of 20 core STEM skills that they've really found to be important, and making sure people are ready and prepared to implement STEM. STEM literacy, having books, if you're a literacy-based program, having more STEM books and magazines, host a science fair at your organization, have these STEM field trips or match activities in the places section, have a few basic supplies for matches to use, some microscopes or hand lenses, even just some hand lenses and some bug box are great ways to sort of help with collection and observation, maybe some baking powder and vinegar, some classic experiments. Host a STEM professional. There's lots of great resources to do that, where you can find some STEM professionals to do that. Get involved in STEM discussion forums or groups. And here, I'd love to hear other ideas that you had or things that you seemed relevant. We have one question here. So I believe Cindy, I will... one question about what you all can do is feel free to type in ways that you might bring STEM into your programming. If you already do, you can talk about maybe an area you might build on this, or if you haven't yet and heard something you liked, feel free to share it out and talk about what that might look like at your organization. So feel free to type or chat those in. I have the question pane open, and yeah, I'd be happy to hear people's ideas. I can read them off. If you'd like to also raise your hand, I can unmute you, but just make sure your background's a little bit clear. So what are some action steps you might take to bring some of this STEM into your programming? So that's great. Okay. Wonderful. So we have one person that says robotics and photography. You will have access to this PowerPoint and webinar afterwards to refer to access the links, to hear the recording, as well as a resource guide. So that's a good question. Great. But feel free to chat in some ideas. Will you bring someone to your community? Will you have a match support session? Will you, where you help your mentors do a little STEM activity? Will you sort of just maybe send these resources out there in a sort of email or news blast? What will you do to bring the world of science, technology, engineering, and math into your programming? Okay, great. And we have made STEM kits for Bigs to borrow. We have also invited many traveling workshops from area museums into our site programs. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Don. And if there's anything, if you want to even say how that went when you did some of that work, we'd love to hear it, but thank you so much for your contribution. Okay. So I know I've worked with some site-based programs on, sharing things like Newsela and sharing some of the learning tools to really, support learning academically. That was that technology piece. I'll give an example. There's one program, Earthen Vessels, that we've been working with, and they really adopted some of those, the Schmoop Essay Lab and Newsela, to really help scaffold some learning. Those are both tools that could really help young people, sort of with literacy and learning in general. So great. And Jennifer just wanted to let everyone know that the Rhode Island Museum of Science and Art is another great resource for STEM programs. Thank you immensely for sharing that, Jennifer. And Allison is mentioning that she really liked the descriptions of the sample activities. Ones like Float Your Boat or Super Bridge could work well with our site-based mentoring programs. Thanks for mentioning that, Allison. PBS Kids Design Squad has a lot of other types of design activity. There's one where you make furniture out of cardboard. There's one where you create catapults. Lots of good things, too, with that. So really, and those tend to be really popular and fun with a lot of students. Dana is saying, great ideas. I would love to have a training where I can share these resources and ideas with mentors. That's terrific. You have really shown how to take simple everyday materials and infuse science. This is quite doable for mentors. Wonderful to hear, and that's exactly, there's definitely, this is, really meant to be a good introduction on ways you can bring some of this to life in your program. There's always more, if you take a little step here and take a little plunge in, you'll find there's other further opportunities to learn and get excited about. But this is, meant to really kind of give you some good resources to kind of get it into your programming and to build upon what you're already doing. So And Don is reiterating that the kids were really excited about the Discovery Museum in Acton, and when they came to do a workshop about sound. They couldn't wait to go home and to school to share what they learned, which is awesome. Wonderful. And this is, again, to keep, mentoring and the work you're doing can really keep a positive, help young people maintain some of these positive attitudes towards learning, especially, STEM, science and math can get hit pretty hard, where it's just sometimes, young people can get turned off by it in certain cases when it doesn't have to have otherwise. And you all have the opportunity to sort of really, keep it a little bit more positive for them and give them those good, foundations to, feel successful with it. So this is terrific what everyone's mentioning. Okay, other ideas, other action steps that folks are taking. I know we're a little bit over, so definitely know if you need to go. Oh, great. And Don's mentioning that these STEM kits are great recruiting tools at tech companies as well. They can actually see themselves doing these activities with their littles. Oh, wonderful. Yes, absolutely. Partnering with tech companies in the area or STEM-focused companies, this wonderful thing to do. If you have a match activity too, when we talk about partnership development, iRobot, for example, in Bedford, will sometimes come to different organizations and demonstrate some really cool robots that they do. And if you have an activity, or if you go to their site, you can do that as well. And the thing about it is maybe some of those match activities, they get involved once with your program, they have a really great time. You might get a few that will stay on to be full-time mentors. It's a good step in the door as well. So all this is kind of related. All right. So at this point, any other last thoughts that folks want to share with the group? Okay, please, if you could all be so kind to take the evaluation that's going to pop up after this webinar is closed. It's going to be, you can get it there or you can get it in your email. Please complete that just so we can get any good feedback and thoughts for, next steps that we might do and know how effective this was. But we so loved all of your ideas and participation. Thank you for taking the time to engage with this, with some of these concepts and ideas and the world of STEM and maybe bringing this a little bit into, bringing this to life in your programming. I think it's a terrific thing to do. It will give you some good supports of different programming you can use that's rich, that's powerful, that's engaging, that's beneficial. So I've enjoyed spending time. We'll be following up with the PowerPoint recordings and eventually the resource guide that goes along with this. But thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and I'll stay on a little bit if there are further questions, but thank you all. All right.
Hi, Nate. This is Sue from Rhode Island. I just wanted to thank you for a wonderful webinar. There was so much information, and I'm glad that we'll have notes and so forth so people will be able to ask meaningful questions at a later time. So thank you again, and please call RIMP when you're done with the webinar. Thank you.